The roar of 1,000 hooves shook the earth like thunder as the massive herd of cattle broke free from their pens, charging wildly across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory in the summer of 1876. Rebecca Owens clutched her 3 children close, frozen in terror as the wall of muscle and horn barreled toward them with unstoppable force. Rebecca had been waiting with her children, 8-year-old Samuel, 6-year-old Lily, and 3-year-old James at the edge of town for the stagecoach that would take them to their new home in Laramie. The death of her husband Thomas 6 months prior had left her with few options but to accept her brother's invitation to start anew. Now, as death stampeded toward them, she wondered if they would ever reach that promised future. The children's screams were swallowed by the deafening rumble. Rebecca pulled them against her skirts, but knew with sickening certainty that there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide on the open flats that bordered the small town of Sweetwater Springs. "Get down." A man's voice cut through the chaos as a tall figure on horseback thundered between them and the oncoming herd. Xavier Porter dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground hard as he rushed toward the terrified family. Without hesitation, he tore off his long canvas duster coat and threw it protectively around the mother and her 3 children, gathering them into a tight huddle. "Keep your heads down," he ordered, his body shielding them as he maneuvered the group toward a shallow depression in the ground. "When I say move, we run for that ravine." Rebecca nodded, her heart pounding as she held her children tight. The stampede was almost upon them, the ground trembling violently beneath their feet. Xavier watched the lead steers, calculating their trajectory with the precision of a man who'd spent his life reading the movements of cattle. When the herd began to veer slightly, he saw their chance. "Now," he shouted, gripping Rebecca's arm while she clutched the youngest child to her chest. Her older children ran alongside, protected by Xavier's broad shoulders as he positioned himself between them and the herd. They reached the ravine moments before the cattle thundered past. The family huddled in the relative safety of the depression as dust and debris rained down around them. Xavier's coat enveloped them like a shield, blocking the worst of the choking dust cloud that engulfed everything. For long minutes they remained frozen, Rebecca's body curved protectively around her children, Xavier's strong presence beside them steady and reassuring. The stampede seemed to last an eternity, though in reality it was less than 5 minutes before the last of the cattle passed. When the rumbling finally subsided, Xavier cautiously raised his head. "Stay here," he said, his voice gentle but firm. He climbed to the edge of the ravine, surveying the damage as the dust slowly settled across the flats. Rebecca looked up at their rescuer for the first time. Tall and broad-shouldered, he had the weathered look of a man who lived by his wits and strength. His dark hair was streaked with premature gray at the temples, and a thin scar ran along his jawline. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, striking blue, intense and watchful, yet with unexpected kindness in their depths. "Is it safe?" she asked, her throat raw from dust and fear. Xavier nodded, extending a hand to help her up. "The danger's past. Are you and your little ones hurt? We're shaken but unharmed, thanks to you." Rebecca gathered her children close, examining each for injuries. "You saved our lives, Mr. Porter, Xavier Porter." He removed his hat briefly, revealing more of that dark hair shot through with silver. "Most folks call me Xav. I'm Rebecca Owens. These are my children Samuel, Lily, and James." She brushed dust from the children's clothes and faces. "We were waiting for the Laramie stage when the cattle broke free." Xavier's expression darkened. "That was Fletcher's herd. Man doesn't maintain his fences properly." He squinted toward town, where men on horseback were now visible, trying to regain control of the scattered cattle. "You folks have somewhere to wait. That stage won't be running today, not with this mess." Rebecca's face fell. "We've no accommodations. We'd already checked out of the boarding house." Xavier hesitated only a moment. "My ranch is about 3 miles east." "You're welcome to rest there until the stage runs again. My housekeeper, Mrs. Barnett, would be glad for the company." Under normal circumstances, Rebecca would never have considered accepting such an offer from a stranger. But these were not normal circumstances, and something in Xavier Porter's straightforward gaze told her she could trust him. "That's very kind, Mr. Porter. We accept with gratitude." Xavier whistled, and his horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding, trotted over. "This is Rusty," he said, patting the animal's neck. "He's gentle enough to carry you and the little one. I'll walk alongside with the older children." Rebecca hesitated. "I couldn't possibly, please, Mrs. Owens. It's no trouble." There was a quiet authority in his voice that brooked no argument. With Xavier's help, Rebecca mounted Rusty with James in her arms. Xavier retrieved his dust-covered coat, shook it out, and draped it over Samuel and Lily as they began their walk toward his ranch. The journey took nearly an hour, with Xavier pointing out landmarks and answering Samuel's endless questions about ranch life. Rebecca observed their rescuer closely. There was an ease about how he interacted with her children, a natural patience that spoke of good character. "There it is," Xavier finally said, gesturing toward a modest but well-maintained ranch house nestled among cottonwoods. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, with fenced pastures stretching into the distance. It wasn't the largest spread Rebecca had seen, but everything about it spoke of care and hard work. "Porter's Rest," he explained. "My father started it, passed it to me 5 years ago when his lungs couldn't take the dust anymore. He and my mother live in Denver now." As they approached the house, a stout woman with iron-gray hair emerged onto the porch, her expression changing from curiosity to concern. "Xavier Porter, what in heaven's name," she broke off, taking in the dust-covered family. "Mrs. Barnett, these folks had a close call with Fletcher's stampeding cattle. This is Mrs. Owens and her children. They'll be staying with us until the stage to Laramie runs again." The housekeeper's face softened immediately. "You poor dears. Come inside, come inside. I've just pulled fresh bread from the oven, and there's stew simmering." Within the hour, Rebecca and her children were clean, fed, and settled in the ranch's guest room. Mrs. Barnett had produced clean clothes seemingly from thin air left by Xavier's sister on her last visit, and had even found a few toys to occupy the children. That evening, after the children were asleep, Rebecca joined Xavier on the porch. The setting sun painted the Wyoming landscape in golds and purples, a beauty that momentarily took her breath away. "Thank you again," she said quietly, wrapping a borrowed shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Xavier leaned against the porch railing, his profile strong against the sunset. "Just happened to be in town at the right time." "You risked your life for strangers," Rebecca persisted. "That's not something every man would do." He turned to look at her then, those remarkable blue eyes reflecting the golden light. "Any decent man would. Perhaps, but decent men seem in short supply these days." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You've had a rough go of it, I take it." Rebecca nodded, looking out over the land rather than meeting his gaze. "My husband died last winter. Pneumonia, left me with 3 children and more debts than assets." She hadn't meant to share so much, but something about Xavier Porter's quiet presence invited confidence. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said simply. "My brother has a mercantile in Laramie. He's offered us a home, at least until I can find suitable work." Xavier nodded, but something in his expression suggested he had more thoughts on the matter than he was sharing. They stood in companionable silence for several minutes, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Mrs. Barnett mentioned you're a widow too," Rebecca said eventually. A shadow crossed Xavier's face. "Yes, Caroline died in childbirth 6 years ago, our son with her. I'm so sorry." Rebecca's heart ached for him. The loss of a spouse was devastating enough. She couldn't imagine also losing a child. "It was a hard time," Xavier acknowledged, his voice low. "Threw myself into the ranch afterward, built it up to what it is now." Rebecca studied him, seeing beyond the strong, capable exterior to the pain he still carried. "It's a fine place. You should be proud." Before Xavier could respond, the sound of hoofbeats approached. A rider appeared in the gathering dusk, coming fast toward the ranch house. Xavier straightened, instantly alert. "That's Matt Johnson, one of my hands," he said, moving to the edge of the porch. The young cowboy reined in his lathered horse. "Mr. Porter, Fletcher's men are rounding up strays all over the south pasture. They're claiming any unmarked calves as theirs." Xavier's expression hardened. Convenient timing for a stampede, isn't it? He turned to Rebecca. Excuse me, Mrs. Owens, I need to handle this. Of course, she replied, but he was already moving, calling out instructions to saddle his backup horse. Within minutes, Xavier and 3 ranch hands rode off toward the south pasture. Rebecca watched them go, a strange uneasiness settling in her chest. Mrs. Barnett appeared in the doorway. Don't you worry about Xavier. He can handle Clayton Fletcher and his bunch of thugs. Are they dangerous men? Rebecca asked, the housekeeper's lips thinned. Fletcher wants this land, has ever since old Mr. Porter first claimed it. The water rights are valuable and Xavier's improved the stock considerably. She shook her head. Fletcher plays dirty, but Xavier's no pushover. Rebecca glanced toward her sleeping children, suddenly feeling very much an intruder in a situation she didn't fully understand. Perhaps we should leave first thing tomorrow. I wouldn't want to impose further or complicate matters. Mrs. Barnett snorted. Nonsense. Xavier brought you here because it was the right thing to do. That's the kind of man he is. Her expression softened. Besides, the stage won't run until they finish clearing the debris from the tracks. That stampede did more damage than just scattering cattle. It was nearly midnight when Xavier returned, his expression grim but satisfied. Rebecca had found herself unable to sleep and was sitting by the fire in the main room when he entered. I'm sorry if I woke you, he said, removing his hat and dust-covered jacket. You didn't. I was waiting up. She poured him a cup of coffee from the pot Mrs. Barnett had left warming. Is everything all right? Xavier accepted the coffee gratefully. Fletcher's men were helping themselves to some of my unbranded calves. We sorted it out. The slight bruise forming on his cheekbone suggested the sorting might have involved more than just conversation. Mrs. Barnett mentioned there's some history there. Xavier sighed, dropping into a chair by the fire. Fletcher's spread borders mine to the south. He's been trying to push me out for years, using whatever underhanded tactics he can think of. He took a sip of coffee. Today's stampede was no accident. One of my men spotted Fletcher's foreman cutting our fence line right before the cattle broke free. That's horrible, Rebecca said, shocked that someone would deliberately cause such dangerous chaos. You could have been killed. Anyone in town could have been hurt. Fletcher doesn't concern himself with such considerations. Xavier's voice was bitter. The law around here is stretched thin, and the territorial judge only comes through every few months. Men like Fletcher operate in the gray spaces between. Rebecca studied him across the firelight. Yet you stay and fight. This land is mine. My father worked himself half to death for it. I won't be run off. There was steel in his voice, a determination that Rebecca found herself admiring. I understand, she said softly. Some things are worth fighting for. Their eyes met across the space between them, and something shifted in the atmosphere, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who understood loss and perseverance. The moment was broken by a small voice from the hallway. Mama. Rebecca turned to find Lily standing in her nightgown, rubbing sleepy eyes. What is it, sweetheart? I had a bad dream, about the cows. Xavier stood immediately. I'll leave you no, please, Rebecca said, gathering Lily into her arms. There's no need. To her surprise, Xavier knelt before her daughter. Did you know that cows are actually quite gentle creatures when they're not scared? He asked Lily. It's only when something frightens them that they run like they did today. Lily regarded him solemnly. Like when Samuel jumps out and scares me and I run to Mama, Xavier smiled, the expression transforming his rugged features. Exactly like that. Only cows are much bigger, so when they run, it makes a lot more noise. Do you have cows here? Lily asked. I do. And if your mother permits, I could show you some gentle ones tomorrow. Would you like that? Lily nodded enthusiastically, her nightmare seemingly forgotten. Rebecca smiled gratefully at Xavier. That's very kind of you. It's no trouble. He stood, stretching his tall frame. Now, I believe we all need some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch. The next day dawned clear and bright. As promised, after breakfast, Xavier took Lily and Samuel to see the gentle milk cows kept near the ranch house. Rebecca followed with James on her hip, charmed by the patience Xavier showed with her curious children. Have you ever milked a cow, Samuel? Xavier asked, demonstrating the technique. The boy shook his head, eyes wide. Would you like to try?" Samuel looked to his mother, who nodded encouragingly. Under Xavier's careful instruction, the boy managed to direct a few streams of milk into the bucket. "I did it, Mama," Samuel exclaimed, beaming with pride. "You certainly did," Rebecca replied, something warm unfurling in her chest as she watched Xavier's hand steady her son's smaller one. Later, as the children played under Mrs. Barnett's watchful eye, Xavier showed Rebecca around the ranch. She admired the orderly barns, the healthy livestock, and the ingenious irrigation system he'd developed to make the most of the available water. "You've built something remarkable here," she told him sincerely. Xavier shrugged, but she could see her words pleased him. "It's a good life." "Hard work, but satisfying." He hesitated, then added, "Lonely at times, though." Rebecca understood that admission for the confidence it was. "Yes, that's the hardest part of losing Thomas. Not just the practical difficulties, but the emptiness of having no one to share your thoughts with at the end of the day." They walked in companionable silence for a while, until Xavier pointed to a distant ridge. "That's the northern boundary of my property. Best view in Wyoming territory up there. It must be beautiful. I could show you sometime." The offer hung in the air, tentative yet hopeful. Rebecca found herself genuinely tempted. "I would like that," she admitted, "but we'll likely be leaving as soon as the stage is running again." "Of course," Xavier said quickly, his expression closing off slightly. "You have plans, family waiting." That evening brought an unexpected visitor to Porter's Rest. Sheriff Daniel Ellis arrived just as they were finishing supper, his expression grim. "Xavier," he nodded in greeting. "Mrs. Owens' children." He removed his hat, revealing thinning brown hair. "I'm afraid I have some news about the stage to Laramie." Rebecca's heart sank. "Is there a problem, Sheriff?" The stage line suspended service for at least a week, maybe two. Yesterday's stampede damaged more than just the stretch near town. Several bridges need repair before it's safe. Xavier frowned. "Fletcher should be held responsible for those repairs," the sheriff sighed. "Hard to prove he was behind it, though you and I both know he was." He turned to Rebecca. "I'm sorry, madam. I know you were counting on that stage." Rebecca felt a momentary panic. Her brother was expecting them, and their funds were limited. "Is there any other way to reach Laramie?" "Not easily, and certainly not safely for a woman traveling alone with 3 young-uns," Sheriff Ellis said. "The next scheduled stage from Cheyenne won't pass through for another 10 days. Xavier spoke up. "Mrs. Owens and her children are welcome to stay here until then." Rebecca turned to him in surprise. "Mr. Porter, that's far too generous. We've imposed enough." "It's no imposition," he insisted. "The house is large, and Mrs. Barnett enjoys having children around." His eyes met hers. "Please, I'd rest easier knowing you were safe." There was something in his gaze that made Rebecca's heart beat faster. She found herself nodding. "Thank you. We accept your hospitality, but only if you'll allow me to earn our keep somehow." The sheriff looked between them with interest before returning to business. "There's something else, Xavier. Fletcher's filed a complaint, claiming your men rustled some of his calves during yesterday's confusion." Xavier's face hardened. "That's rich coming from him." I know. The sheriff held up his hands placatingly. "I'm not taking it seriously, but I had to inform you officially. Watch your back. Fletcher's not one to let go of a grudge." After the sheriff departed, Rebecca found Xavier standing alone on the porch, his posture tense with barely contained anger. "I'm sorry about Fletcher," she said quietly, joining him. "He sounds like a dangerous man." Xavier's laugh was without humor. "He is, but I've dealt with his kind before. Perhaps." Rebecca hesitated. "Perhaps the children and I should find other arrangements." "I wouldn't want to bring trouble to your door." Xavier turned to face her, his expression softening. "Rebecca, Mrs. Owens, Fletcher was causing trouble long before you arrived, and he'll continue long after." He trailed off, then continued more firmly. "You and your children aren't responsible for any of this. Please stay." The way he said her name sent a warmth through Rebecca that had nothing to do with the evening temperature. "If you're certain," she said, "I am." His blue eyes held hers, and for a breathless moment, Rebecca thought he might say more. Instead, he simply smiled and pointed to the first star appearing in the evening sky. "Make a wish." Rebecca followed his gaze upward, suddenly aware of how long it had been since she'd allowed herself to wish for anything beyond basic security for her children. "What did you wish for?" she asked impulsively. Xavier's smile deepened, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Can't tell." Wouldn't come true. The days that followed established a surprising rhythm. Rebecca insisted on helping with household tasks alongside Mrs. Barnett, who grudgingly admitted that it was pleasant having another woman's company. The children thrived in the open spaces of the ranch, with Samuel particularly fascinated by the daily operations. "The boy has a natural way with horses," Xavier commented on the 5th day, watching Samuel help one of the ranch hands with the morning feeding. "Reminds me of myself at that age." Rebecca observed her son's obvious delight. "He's never had this kind of freedom. In town after Thomas died, I was so afraid of something happening to the children that I kept them close, perhaps too close." "Children need room to grow," Xavier agreed. "Like young colts, they need to stretch their legs." That afternoon, Xavier taught Samuel to ride properly on a gentle mare named Daisy, with Rebecca watching nervously from the corral fence. Her anxiety slowly transformed to pride as her son gained confidence with each circuit of the enclosure. "Your turn," Xavier said unexpectedly, turning to Rebecca after helping Samuel dismount. She shook her head, laughing. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly. Have you never ridden?" Xavier asked, genuinely surprised. "Not since I was a girl, and never properly, just pony rides at county fairs." Xavier extended his hand. "Then it's high time you learned, Mrs. Owens." Perhaps it was the challenge in his eyes or the encouraging shouts of her children, but Rebecca found herself taking his hand and allowing him to help her onto Daisy's back. "That's it," he said, his hand warm and steady on her back as he guided her into the correct posture. "Sit tall, keep your heels down." His proximity was distracting, the subtle scent of leather and soap making it difficult for Rebecca to focus on his instructions. When his hands adjusted her grip on the reins, her breath caught at the brief contact. "Ready to try moving?" he asked, apparently unaware of her reaction. Rebecca nodded, not trusting her voice. Xavier led Daisy in a slow walk around the corral, offering guidance and encouragement. After several circuits, Rebecca began to relax into the rhythm of the horse's movement. "See, you're a natural," Xavier said, his smile warming his entire face. "Hardly," Rebecca laughed, "but it is enjoyable. Tomorrow we'll try a proper ride." There's a meadow about a mile east that's filled with wildflowers this time of year. The invitation hung in the air between them, laden with possibility. Rebecca knew she should decline their time at Porter's Rest was temporary, after all, but found herself nodding instead. "I'd like that." That evening after the children were asleep, Rebecca and Xavier sat on the porch swing, a respectable distance between them as they talked about everything and nothing. She learned about his childhood dreams of exploring beyond Wyoming, his brief stint as a freight driver before returning to help his father with the ranch, and the books he read during the long winter months. In turn, she shared stories of her life before marriage, her father's small bookshop in St. Louis, her love of painting, ambitions she'd set aside when she became a wife and mother. "You could paint again," Xavier suggested. "The light here is exceptional. Artists from back east sometimes travel through trying to capture the landscapes." Rebecca smiled wistfully. "Perhaps someday. When the children are older and life is more settled." "Why wait?" Xavier's question was gentle but challenging. "Life doesn't pause for convenient moments, Rebecca." The use of her first name, now becoming a habit rather than an exception, warmed her. "You're right, of course. Thomas used to say I had a talent for postponing my own happiness." Xavier's hand moved across the space between them, hesitated, then covered hers where it rested on the swing. "What would make you happy now, Rebecca?" The question hung in the air, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Rebecca looked into Xavier's eyes, seeing there a reflection of her own loneliness, her own cautious hope. "This," she admitted softly, "moments like this." His fingers tightened slightly around hers. They sat together in the gathering darkness, the porch swing moving gently, neither feeling the need to fill the silence with words. The promised ride to the meadow the next day became a family excursion. Xavier arranged for Samuel to ride his own pony, while Lily sat in front of Xavier on his gelding. Rebecca rode Daisy with James securely in her lap. Mrs. Barnett packed them a picnic lunch, and they set off in the clear morning light. The meadow was everything Xavier had promised, a lush expanse dotted with wildflowers of every color, bordered by a small creek that gurgled pleasantly over smooth stones. The children immediately raced to explore, their excited voices carrying across the open space. "It's beautiful," Rebecca said, turning slowly to take in the panorama of meadow, distant mountains, and endless blue sky. Like something from a painting. Xavier watched her, his expression softening. "Yes, it is." They spread blankets in the shade of a cottonwood and unpacked Mrs. Barnett's generous lunch. The afternoon passed in a haze of contentment, the children playing, Xavier teaching Samuel to skip stones across the creek's surface, Rebecca weaving flower crowns for Lily's hair. As they prepared to return to the ranch, Rebecca found herself reluctant to leave this perfect day behind. Xavier must have sensed her thoughts, for he said quietly, "We can come back anytime you like." "But we'll be leaving soon," Rebecca reminded him, though the thought brought an unexpected pang. Xavier's expression grew serious. "Rebecca, whatever he might have said was interrupted by the sound of approaching riders. 4 men on horseback appeared at the edge of the meadow, and Rebecca immediately recognized the tension that shot through Xavier's body. "Get the children," he said quietly, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Stay behind me." Rebecca quickly gathered her little ones, her heart racing as she recognized Clayton Fletcher at the head of the approaching group, from Xavier's descriptions, a heavyset man with a florid face and cold eyes. "Well, well," Fletcher called as they drew closer. "If it isn't Xavier Porter on a family outing." His gaze swept dismissively over Rebecca and the children. "Didn't take you long to replace Caroline, did it?" Xavier's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. "State your business, Fletcher, then move on. You're trespassing." Fletcher's laugh held no humor. "Funny, I was about to say the same to you. This meadow's part of my property now." "That's a lie, and you know it," Xavier replied evenly. "This land has been part of Porter's Rest since my father's time. Not according to the new survey." Fletcher produced a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Territorial office confirmed it yesterday. The boundary line runs through the creek there, putting this whole meadow on my side." Rebecca could see the fury and disbelief warring in Xavier's expression. "That's impossible," he said. "I have the original land grant. Documents get lost, boundaries get redrawn," Fletcher said with mock sympathy. "Especially when a man doesn't have powerful friends in the territorial office." He nodded to his men. "We're putting up fence posts tomorrow. Consider this your only warning to stay clear." The threat was unmistakable. Rebecca clutched her children closer, fear coiling in her stomach as she noted the weapons carried by Fletcher's men. Xavier's hand remained near his gun, but he made no move to draw it. With 3 young children present, he wouldn't risk violence, and Fletcher knew it. "This isn't over," Xavier said quietly. "Oh, I think it is," Fletcher replied. "Be smart, Porter. First this meadow, then maybe that northern pasture. Eventually you'll see reason and sell out to me entirely." His gaze shifted to Rebecca and the children. "Especially now that you've got a ready-made family to consider." Xavier took a step forward, but Rebecca quickly placed a restraining hand on his arm. Fletcher laughed, wheeled his horse, and rode away with his men following. The ride back to the ranch was subdued, the earlier joy of the day overshadowed by Fletcher's threats. After the children were occupied with Mrs. Barnett, Xavier strode to his office with Rebecca following. "He can't simply take your land, can he?" she asked as Xavier rifled through a trunk of documents. "Not legally, no." Xavier's voice was tight with anger as he extracted an old, yellow document. "Here's the original land grant, signed and sealed. The meadow has always been part of Porter's Rest." "Then we must go to the sheriff," Rebecca insisted. The "we" slipping out naturally, Xavier looked up, his expression softening momentarily at her words. "The sheriff's a good man, but he's limited in what he can do against someone like Fletcher, who has connections in the territorial government." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I need to ride to Cheyenne, speak to the land office directly, maybe consult a lawyer." "When will you go?" Rebecca asked, already calculating what this meant for her plans. "First light tomorrow," It's a 2-day ride each way, assuming all goes well. He hesitated. Rebecca, I hate to ask, but we'll be fine here, she assured him. Mrs. Barnett is more than capable and your men know their duties. Relief crossed his features. Thank you, I wouldn't go if it weren't urgent. I understand. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. This is your home, your legacy. You must fight for it. Xavier covered her hand with his blue eyes intense. When I return, Rebecca, there's something I need to discuss with you, something important. Her heart quickened at his tone. I'll be here. The morning of Xavier's departure brought a flurry of activity. He gave instructions to his foreman, ensured the ranch hands knew to keep special watch on the boundaries, and spoke privately with Sheriff Ellis, who had ridden out to see him off. Before mounting his horse, Xavier drew Rebecca aside. If there's any trouble, any sign of Fletcher or his men, send word to the sheriff immediately. We'll be careful, she promised. Unexpectedly emotional at his leaving, Xavier hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pressed something into her hand, a small, intricately carved wooden rose. I made this years ago after Caroline died. It reminded me that beauty can emerge from the darkest times. His voice roughened. I want you to have it. Rebecca closed her fingers around the carving, touched beyond words by the gesture. Xavier, he shook his head, a gentle smile touching his lips. Tell me when I return. With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, looking back once to lift his hand in farewell. The days of Xavier's absence passed slowly. Rebecca found herself constantly watching the horizon, hoping for his return. The children asked for him daily, especially Samuel, who had taken to following the ranch hands and helping with their tasks. On the 4th day, trouble arrived. Rebecca was hanging laundry when she heard shouting from the direction of the south pasture. Moments later, one of Xavier's young ranch hands came galloping toward the house. Mrs. Owens, he called, reining in his lathered horse. Fletcher's men are cutting our fence lines and driving our cattle onto their land. Rebecca's heart raced. How many men? At least 6, all armed, the young cowboy reported. Johnson sent me to fetch help while he and the others try to hold them off. Rebecca made a swift decision. Ride to town for the sheriff. Tell him exactly what's happening. She turned to Mrs. Barnett, who had emerged from the house. Keep the children inside, away from windows. Where are you going? The housekeeper demanded as Rebecca headed for the barn, to get Xavier's rifle. Minutes later, Rebecca rode Daisy toward the south pasture, Xavier's Winchester repeating rifle secured in the saddle's scabbard. She had no intention of using it, wouldn't know how if she tried, but Fletcher's men wouldn't know that. She arrived to find a tense standoff. Matt Johnson and 3 other Porter ranch hands were facing off against twice as many of Fletcher's men across a downed section of fence. Cattle milled about in confusion as Fletcher himself supervised his men driving the animals through the gap. Stop this immediately. Rebecca called out, drawing all eyes to her. She kept Daisy at a distance that she hoped appeared strategic rather than fearful, her hand resting near but not on the rifle. Fletcher's eyebrows rose in surprise. Well, look who it is, Porter's woman, playing at being the rancher's wife. His mocking tone carried across the open space. This doesn't concern you, lady. Go back to the house. This is Porter land and these are Porter cattle, Rebecca replied, her voice steadier than she felt. The sheriff has been summoned. I suggest you withdraw your men before this becomes a legal matter. Fletcher laughed. You think I'm afraid of that toothless old man? By the time he gets here, these cattle will be on my land with my brand. One of Fletcher's men moved his horse forward, hand dropping to his holstered gun. Rebecca's heart pounded, but she held her position. You heard Mrs. Owens, came a new voice, deep and familiar. Stand down. Xavier Porter rode into view from the east, flanked by Sheriff Ellis and 2 deputies. Relief flooded through Rebecca at the sight of him. Tall and commanding in the saddle, Fletcher's expression darkened. This is my land now, Porter. I have the papers to prove it. Forged papers, Xavier countered, moving his horse to Rebecca's side. His eyes met hers briefly, filled with a mix of concern and something warmer. The land office confirmed it. They're sending officials to resurvey the boundaries, but until then, nothing changes. The sheriff moved forward. Fletcher, you and your men need to withdraw. Cutting fences is a crime. as is attempting to alter brands, which I can see your man there preparing to do." He nodded toward one of Fletcher's cowboys, who was indeed holding a branding iron. For a tense moment, it seemed Fletcher might order his men to fight, but eventually he spat on the ground and gestured for them to withdraw. "This isn't over, Porter." "Yes, it is," Xavier replied firmly. "The land office is also investigating your other claims. Seems several ranchers have lost acreage to your revised surveys." Fletcher's face flushed with anger, but with the sheriff present, he had little choice but to retreat, driving his men back toward his own property with a stream of curses. When they were safely gone, Xavier turned to Rebecca, his expression a mix of admiration and exasperation. "What were you thinking, confronting armed men alone?" "I wasn't alone," she replied, nodding toward Johnson and the other hands, "and someone had to do something until help arrived." Xavier shook his head, but a reluctant smile tugged at his mouth. "You're either the bravest or the most foolhardy woman I've ever met." "Perhaps a bit of both," she admitted. That evening, after the excitement had settled and the fence was repaired, Rebecca and Xavier again found themselves on the porch. The children were asleep, exhausted by the day's events and overjoyed by Xavier's return. "The stage to Laramie resumes tomorrow," Xavier said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Rebecca felt her heart sink. "Yes, I heard. Your brother will be worried. I sent a letter last week explaining the delay." She hesitated, then added, "I should honor my commitment to him. He's expecting us, has made arrangements." Xavier turned to face her, his expression serious in the lamplight spilling from the window. "What if you had another option, Rebecca, another place to call home?" Her breath caught. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not a man for flowery words," Xavier said, taking her hand in his. "But these past 2 weeks with you and your children here, it's brought life back to this house to me. I know it's fast, and I know you have plans, but—" He took a deep breath. "I'm asking you to stay, not as my guest, but as my wife." Rebecca stared at him, her heart pounding. "Xavier, I'd be a father to your children," he continued earnestly. "They already feel at home here. Samuel has a gift with horses, Lily loves the garden, and little James, well, he's won over every hand on the place." He squeezed her fingers gently. "And you, Rebecca, I believe we could build something good together, something lasting." Tears pricked Rebecca's eyes. "I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought of it," she admitted, "but it's such a risk for both of us." "Life is risk," Xavier said simply. "The question is whether this particular risk feels right to you." His blue eyes held her steadily. "It does to me." Rebecca thought of the life awaiting her in Laramie, living in her brother's shadow, dependent on his charity, searching for work while raising 3 children alone. Then she thought of Porter's Rest, of the home it had already become, of the man before her who had risked his life for her family before he even knew their names. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, it feels right." The joy that blazed across Xavier's face was answer enough. But he sealed his proposal by drawing her into his arms and kissing her with a tenderness that held the promise of deeper passion to come. 3 months later, Rebecca stood on the porch of Porter's Rest, her home now in every sense, watching Xavier teaching Samuel to rope a practice post in the yard. Lily was helping Mrs. Barnett collect eggs, while James toddled after a patient ranch dog. The territorial officials had confirmed the original boundaries of Porter's Rest, and Clayton Fletcher was facing charges for document forgery. The ranch was secure, and with Rebecca's careful bookkeeping and Xavier's hard work, it was thriving. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach, smiling at the secret she would share with her husband that evening. Their family would grow again by spring, adding another branch to the Porter family tree. As if sensing her thoughts, Xavier looked up and met her eyes across the yard. His smile, still capable of quickening her heartbeat after all these months, told her everything she needed to know about the rightness of their decision. From disaster had come deliverance. From a chance encounter during a stampede had come a love strong enough to build a future on. Rebecca Owens Porter watched her family old and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be.